Next up, we're going to carve the so-called perfect notch in a friction fireboard. Perfection obviously being elusive, but there's some things we really aim for to limit our variables and up our chances of success here. So here on the table I have a variety of fireboards. Some have been used more than others. There are a wide selection of good notches and poor notches. So I'm going to talk about and demonstrate carving a notch that is what we want to go for, aim for, at least in the very beginning. So what we're really looking for is a triangular shaped notch that runs from the edge of the board into our socket that's been burned in from our spindle. Now we're starting with, I'm going to demonstrate on this piece, so it's a fireboard that's already been prepped and burnt in. If you haven't done that yet, check out our other video on preparing a fireboard. So we're going to start from here and carve a notch. But notice how these notches are a little bit off center of the socket. We want to avoid that. What we're really going for is a notch that is centered very much on the socket itself, on that circular part. And it's triangular, and it doesn't run quite into the middle of the socket. The angle we want is about a 45-degree triangle. So if you're unfamiliar with what 45 degrees looks like, something you can simply do to make yourself a template is take a sheet of paper with square 90-degree angle edges, fold that in half so you get a triangular corner on there, and that's going to be 45 degrees. You can lay that down and trace it. You can use a dollar bill or something like that. So what we want then is a triangle that is centered on our socket, about 45 degrees, centered on our socket, but it doesn't go quite into the center. And why not into the center? Well, think of it this way. When the spindle sits here, it of course shouldn't come all the way to the edge of your fireboard, but the farther in that triangle goes, the more of the circumference of this circle, this socket, it's going to undermine, it's going to take out. So take that to an extreme. If we were to cut a notch all the way back to, say, the back of the socket, it's going to take out a huge piece of this edge right here. That's bad. As we try to spin our socket, the more of that edge that's gone, the more tendency the spindle is going to slip out. So 45 degrees, just shy of the center. Okay, so that the bottom of the spindle is still setting in the socket and not the notch itself. Now if you want to mark it fully out down the face, the edge of the board as well, you can do that. Something like this. Now personally I prefer, that 45-degree angle notch, but with vertical sides this way. You will see, especially illustrated in some of the old Boy Scout manuals, in some older illustrations, you'll see that towards the bottom of the fireboard, some folks will actually flare the notch outward as well, so you have sort of a compound angle. You have the 45 this way, but you also have it flaring out, getting wider, going back. And I think, personally, having experimented with that, I don't notice any difference in efficiency or what it gets you, what it gains you, and I think it complicates the carving of this piece, especially if you're beginning, trying to carve a compound angle into a three-dimensional object. So we've marked out our 45-degree triangle with vertical sides. Now what I like to do, if we come in and try to carve right here, I'm using my knife blade across an entire, in this case about 3/4 inch thick piece of wood. Versus if I come in here and carve just on the edge, just on the very corner here, I'm isolating that blade and the same amount of pressure on a much smaller area, which obviously increases the pressure, makes the carving much easier. Recall that a knife is designed and works best when we're slicing, but it does often become rather difficult in this case to apply a lateral motion to increase the slicing. So we're often kind of pushing and relying a bit on force. So if we isolate it to a smaller area like this, it works much easier, like so. I'm going to come in and just kind of wiggle it in. You can see how easily the knife bites right in there. Okay. Now, what you want to avoid doing, especially in this case, is a cedar, which splits very easily. If I dig in here too deep and try to pop that out, there's a chance it's going to split all the way down here and take out the far corner of my notch. That's bad. So you'll see I come in, carve my first little sort of backstop. I'm going to flip around this way, again come to the same edge, and now when I come in, if I pop that out, it only runs to where I had that step to begin with. Okay, so I pop that a little piece there. I'm going to flip and work on this edge now. Same thing. Back. You will find, of course, sometimes accidentally it gets away from you and splits down, and we work with what we have. Now I've taken out that edge and this edge, and what it gets us is sort of an edge in between. It's a lot narrower here. So now I'm going to come at the middle, slice in, turn back this way, and pop it out that way. So we're on our way. I'm going to return to the, now that I have a new top edge here, come in here, flip it around, bottom, and now the middle. Now notice I am popping these chips out, but do your best to avoid, especially as we get to the bottom of the notch, do your best to avoid really dishing it like this. We're aiming for a V, not a U. Okay, so keep that in mind as we work down here. Notice I'm using kind of a rocking motion as I get down in here towards the base. We're still a little flat here, and this is where, you know, having that eye where we're going for perfection is ideal. You know, that's still a flat bottom, which is bad. So I'm going to come in and keep working there. It's obviously getting narrower and narrower. Getting closer. All right, and we're almost there. We're about probably 90% of the way there with that notch. But if you look up close at this, I can see that the faces of my notch are slightly rounded in like this. Okay. So what I tend to do to finish this up is I'll come back in and very carefully, and this is so much easier when you have a thin, sharp knife than like a gigantic, wider, thicker stock knife. I'll come in and I'm just going to take some thin slices off each of these faces. Just think about like slicing prosciutto or something, you know, where you want it really, really thin. So I'll come in. And clean it up. Make sure you're staying safe with your knife. Obviously you're working close to the blade here, but there's always something in between my hands and the blade, keeping myself safe. And it's not terrible. I'll work for a coal. So, as you can see, we have that. Get the hairs out of the way. I really like to clean this up. You don't want any, you know, look closely and make sure that you're not leaving any dust particles or hairs or anything, and depending on what type of wood you're using, that may be more or less difficult. But you really want this super clean in there. If you have a bunch of, you know, little like fibers hanging out there, when the dust falls through to make your coal, it'll get hung up on those, or sometimes it'll even prevent it from dropping into the notch. So we just want this super clean all the way down. But you'll see it goes almost into the center of the socket. It's that approximately 45-degree angle. This kind of reminds me of the Eye of Providence on the back of the dollar bill, the all-seeing eye, with the triangle and the rays emanating out. So if that is a visual that helps you remember what this should look like, use that. But you know, it's based off of the socket being that certain distance out from the edge. lay out the template of your triangle, carve it in. You could totally do a bunch of these all down the board, prep them ahead of time, and then when it comes time to make your fire, you're just set to go. You can set up here and start cruising, you know, and that's where the dust gathers. If you're really in a hurry, or you're trying to mass produce a bunch of these, say for, you know, a demo or a class, you know, how else could you cut this, especially quicker? You could even start your sockets with, say, a twist drill bit on a drill press or something, and then mark out all your triangles and cut them on, say, a bandsaw or with a jigsaw or even with a hacksaw blade or something. May go a lot quicker. Although if you're looking to build your skill with bow drill, I'd strongly suggest, you know, sitting down and just carving a dozen of these, or maybe one a day for a week or something, and just really following those precision ideas to aim for the so-called perfect notch.